Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to TDU's YouTube show. We are so happy you're here. We're so happy to be back. Damien, it's so good to
Yay!
see you. I'm back here. My name is Sarah Overton. I'm the production manager for The Dream Unfinished, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Damien Norfleet. Damien, hello.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, everyone. But most importantly, hello, Sarah.
Hello, it's so good to see you. I know last week we had that wonderful Hypercube episode where we just kind of went in on repertoire consultations for new
Nice.
music, which was so exciting. And so it's so good to be back here with you.
Nice. Did they love you? Did they fall in love with TDU? Did they?
Yeah, I think, anybody who meets us just falls in love.
I love it. What were some highlights? Were there any particular songs you recommended that were particularly good matches for them?
Well, Hypercube is just such an interesting ensemble.
Mm.
Their instrumentation is just very different. They've got a lot of winds, they've got some strings, they do a lot of compositional stuff,
Oh, okay.
that kind of comes into play when they're bringing other people in and do these compositional workshops. So it's really neat how they're just able to sort of put everything together. So a lot of what we recommended was maybe you can do an arrangement of this piece, or maybe
Oh,
you
okay.
can, kind of bring something in, add a little guitar, add a little percussion, and they're able to do all of it. So it was really wonderful to talk to them.
I have a quick question about that. I
Yeah.
have I feel like sometimes it's like this controversial space. What are
Mm.
your particular thoughts and opinions on like changing keys of extant
Mm.
pieces? How do you feel about that? Are you like a purist about things need to be performed in the original key they are written, or are you fine with transposition?
Yeah, I'm not a purist at all. I have a very strong opinion on not being a purist about
Nice,
changing
nice.
keys and doing something different, adding a little improvisation.
Yes.
I think music, sheet music, written music, is oftentimes a blueprint. At least that's the way that I take it. This is the foundation of what should be put out, and then maybe you add something different to it. It's almost like a collaboration
Yeah.
between the artist and the composer.
Yeah.
The way that I view some of these things.
I view it that way too, and especially as a vocalist, I feel like it's particularly weird. I think sometimes in like the classical realm, people like opposed to changing keys to vocal music, and I think it's so
Mhm.
funny considering that most vocal music, when it was written between that composer and that particular singer, is only putting the key for that person. It was never meant to be like stuck in that particular place,
Yeah.
and it's only like later people. I don't know. It's so funny the conversations that center around moving something up or down, even a half step, people really
Right.
have strong feelings about it. It's very interesting. So I'm glad you had a great session with them. I think that's really, really
Yeah.
fun. I can't wait to check them out more in detail.
Yeah. Oh, everybody should. I mean, they're just a wonderful ensemble, and TDU, and we're just so happy to be able to do this and work with other groups and just kind of expose some of the music that's really out there, because it's all really wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yay. I'm so happy to see you. I'm sorry. I'm trying to like maintain some kind of professional decorum, but I'm like genuinely happy to see you
Oh,
for like for like so many
good
reasons.
I know it's so good to see you too. And I noticed
Yeah.
your background's a little different today. Are you
Oh,
different today?
yes. That's
Okay.
because I'm coming to you from New York City today, just down the street. Just down the street.
Very much.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm in town for a little work, a little play.
Mhm.
But the interwebs goes everywhere. So here I am. Here I am.
Very nice. Very
Yeah.
nice. Happy to have you join in from right up the road.
It's a nice little homecoming.
Yeah, this is so good. So I
Yeah.
want to ask you, what have
Yes.
you been listening to this week? I mean, you've
Oh
done a
my
lot of traveling, doing a
goodness.
lot of thinking about artistry, and what's going on in your
Yes.
ears? What's on your head?
So my listening and my life has coincided
Mm.
and collided with this week's theme and thesis. I mean, listen, mental health has been the name of the game for the last 7 days. I have been proactively protecting my peace. I even made like a hashtag on Twitter
Mm.
called Protect Your Peace because I just felt like it was so important this week of all weeks. There was so much development internationally, globally, you know what I mean? There's news abroad, there's news domestically, there's news in my neighborhood of Minneapolis.
Yeah.
You know, there's news in our country of the United States, there's news in our industry. I mean, there's just all kinds of news, and it can be overwhelming. And so I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go ahead and engage in some proactive things to just kind of maintain my sanity and peace of mind. And one of those things was listening to lots of great music. But then in particular, I listened to a piece by a peer and a fabulous flautist, professor, composer, um, named Allison. She wrote a piece, and we'll get into her more in more detail in a minute because she's incredibly talented. And if our viewers don't know her, they're about to know a little bit about her, but they should know a lot more about her. She composed a piece that was inspired by some of her musings and thoughts about inherited trauma. And not just, obviously not physical trauma, because, well, maybe not obviously, and maybe it does apply to some physical trauma, but the kind of mental trauma and just like mental things that could be passed down from generation to generation, and the things that we're still holding on. She gave actually a lovely talk before the world premiere of this particular piece, where she goes into detail about some of her thoughts on the topic and what specific things led to the composition of the piece. I'll allow people to find that on their own and dig into that, or contact her, research her, ask her thoughts. I think she'd appreciate it. But the piece is called The Overture to Our Inheritance, I believe. I might be getting those words incorrect. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's called Overture to Our Inheritance.
I think it's The Inheritor's Overture. Yeah.
Even better. Yep.
I love that. I mean, either way.
But that is the piece that I've been listening to. I listened to it probably a grand total of, I would say, 16 times. It was one of those, it was just a moment and a piece that I just found myself revisiting in parts, which I thought was interesting. But that's the piece I was listening to. And the thing I like the most about it, and that I like the most about the body of work of Allison's that I've personally been exposed to, because I got a chance to work with her at the end of last year on another one of her pieces that my ensemble actually commissioned, which was really, really, really cool. She has such a gift for motif work, and just theme development. She's just got a gift for it, where I feel like sometimes you listen to some pieces, and tell me how you feel about this, but I think sometimes you listen to pieces that are, a collection of different motives and whatever. And I think sometimes those motifs can be obscured or delivered in a way where you kind of have to dig for them. You have to go back and like look for them, or sometimes you even have to revisit the score to find them. Allison is particularly gifted, well, in many ways, but in the way I'm speaking about at the moment, she's particularly gifted in making sure that certain motifs, conjugation. I'm just like, you know what? But she's really gifted at making sure that certain motives and themes are pronounced and clearly discernible to the listener. In my opinion, like that's what I take away from her work a lot. I mean, it's so multi-layered that she's a multi-layered person and a multi-layered composer. But that's what I've been listening to. It was a lovely piece for full orchestra that was uniquely produced and performed in a way for the pandemic. So everyone kind of recorded their parts at home, and it was all like digitally brought together. So that in itself was really interesting. But it's a great piece, and it provided me lots of little motives and themes to grab onto, and just kind of, I made parallels, and I don't know if she even meant for some of these things to parallel, but I took some of her themes and they just seemed to represent different things that I was specifically dealing with this past week, whether it be the ish in Minneapolis, which was positive and difficult at the same time, right? It was the anniversary of the slaughter. I don't know a better word. It was after you rewatch those tapes after a year. I can't think of a better word. I mean, it was horrible to watch a year later, but it was a moment in Minneapolis of highlighting that horrible event, but it was also a moment of solidifying a sense of community,
Right.
um, and um, and giving kind of like this weird acknowledgement to the movement that was
Mhm.
kind of sparked by the events in Minneapolis a year ago. So it was a bittersweet kind of moment in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And Allison's piece served as a nice little, it was almost like a hub because I kept
Yeah.
revisiting it. So I would visit it and think about something, then kind of leave, and then something else would touch me in life, and I revisited the piece,
Right.
and remarkably, I could find something in the piece that spoke to that new moment I was having. And that's kind of the beauty with music, right? And the thing
Yeah.
that just blows my mind the most is I had a chance to speak with her, just remotely, through a live chat sort of a thing,
Mhm.
um, because I detected some musical themes and patterns that I recognized. And so I talked to her because I thought I heard a very distinct moment of the spiritual. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
Mm.
And when we hear the piece, maybe we'll get to a section where we might hear a section that sounds like that. And remarkably enough, and as amazing as our art form is, it was not intended. And that was kind of a fun moment because I was like, oh my God, Allison, I loved how you incorporated my favorite spiritual in this moment. She was
Yeah.
like, what? I was like, yeah, right here where you use
Yeah.
that theme. She's like,
Uh,
that was not intentional. And she's like,
yeah.
I'm going to go back and revisit that because that was not intentional. I was like, wow, because to me it was such a strong thing I heard in it. But, we do have these, we've got this system of 12 notes, right? So
Right.
it's inevitable
Yep.
that like
We're
patterns
gonna hear
will,
something. Yep.
yeah, but
Your
that's,
mind's
but
gonna connect it differently, of course.
right.
Yeah.
But so in addition to like the balm that it gave me in this moment, it also reminded me of the power of what we do, right?
Mhm.
Like art is so funny because you can be so intentional in your creation of art, whether it be our music
Mhm.
or a painting, and someone else, an audience, can take something completely different from it, and that is the magic of it. It's that conversation you have, like,
Right.
you intend, like Picasso's blue period, we don't know if he intended it to be a melancholy or sad or reflective thing. We don't know what he actually was experiencing, but we do have our takeaways from it, and
Mhm.
that's the beauty of art in general. But I think it's especially beautiful in what we do. And a little later in the conversation, I'm going to share my first encounter
Mhm.
with opera,
Oh, yeah.
which kind of touches on the experience I had with Allison's piece for the Riley Symphony. It was another moment in which I took something away from it that was absolutely not intended by the
Right.
creator, but it's a moment that stuck with me up until present. I mean, it's a moment that I took with me up until 2021 throughout my professional career, and none of it was intended by Puccini. But it
Oh.
is what a young 17-year-old Damien took away from a recording I had. But anyway, we'll revisit that a little bit later in the conversation. But that's what I've been listening to. And so if the people get a chance to hear it, are we playing it now?
Yeah, let's play it
Yes.
now. I
Okay,
think I
great.
think we should play a little bit of it now. I'm gonna
Oh
play
my God,
some
I'd be
just
so
for
glad.
everyone. And it's so funny that you say that because you and I talk about just being really passionate about how everyone should hear everything. You know, like when it comes to music, I mean, opening up opportunities for people to hear opera, for people to hear symphonies, all of that is just so important because you have different takes on it. You have different
Yeah.
takeaways. It means something different uniquely to you. So with that, this is the Inheritors Overture by Allison Loggins Hall.
Yes.
And this is being played by the Raleigh Civic Chamber Orchestra. All right, I'm gonna stop it there. I think that
Awesome.
gives a lot of people just kind of a taste of it, and I heard it too. I heard this
Did
sometimes.
you
I
hear
feel,
it?
yeah, sometimes I feel
Yeah.
like a motherless child.
So I'm
It
not
was right
crazy,
there.
right?
Yeah, no, not at all. It's in there. It's in there for sure.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I was so surprised. I think the word shocked came to mind because it's so, to me, I picked out immediately. It was such a strong theme to me.
Yeah.
So when she was like, "Oh no, that wasn't intentional," I was like,
Mhm.
I was like, "Wow."
Yeah.
But then it was also funny because the whole point of the piece, right, was it was inspired by the ideas of inheritance, but in this case,
Right.
inherited trauma. But I was like, how funny that there was an example of inherited music. So
Mhm.
even she didn't intend to use this theme that has
Mhm.
been present in African American music, right? I dare say, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. I think that melody is a very strong melody in our heritage musically.
Yeah.
It's just, I
Mhm.
think of all of the spirituals we have. I think that's one of the biggies. That's one of
Mhm.
the top three, I think, that people just know and recognize. And so I was like, huh. So even without intentionally using that material, that's another kind of form of inheritance. Like we've just heard those, we've heard that mode, right? Because I think at this point it was kind of, I think this point would just kind of sounds like it's written in a mode more than a key to my ear. And maybe that's part of the reason why, to me, it sounded so much like that spiritual. So many of the spirituals are actually kind of written more in modes than I think they are
Yeah.
than keys.
Oh, very
Again, to my ear, right? Because
right.
that's also weird, right? Because all the modes kind of have these like weird distant cousins that are also keys, right?
Yeah.
Like they kind of mixing, like, Aeolian mode is really just a minor key, right? So
Exactly.
it's like we get into all of that stuff, but I just thought it was such an interesting conversation point. It just made me think so much when she said that she didn't do it on purpose. And I
Yeah.
was like, wow, that reinforces this idea of inheritance then. It was
It's
something that was part of our,
mhm.
yeah, it just kind of made its way into there. But if you get a chance, you and everyone watching, if you get a chance to dig into Allison's music, um, it's just so delectably complex.
Mm.
Like it's so polyrhythmic and so layered. And I mean, I'm not going to act like I know her incredibly well. We're not like bosom buddies. We're not childhood friends. We just worked together a few months ago, and I was incredibly impressed with her. And I bought her Flutronics. Oh my goodness, Flutronics. Do you know about Flutronics?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
excellent stuff. And
Flut
anybody watching should know about Flutronics.
Oh my goodness, it's so fun and so amazing. And yeah, it's something to get into. For just really quickly, for those who don't know it, Allison and her collaborator who's also a flautist and vocalist. They have fused together like traditional classical flute traditions with like hip hop and house music and electronic kind of practices, and have come up with this beautiful smorgasbord of a sound that I don't even know. I think it's kind of beyond category, but it's this wonderful sound. It's this wonderful fusion of like hip hop, R&B, classical
Mhm.
flute and voice. That's
Very
just
cool.
so unique.
Yeah.
And it's just so fun. You know, it's a fun thing. Allison Luggins get into her.
I
Get into
know.
her.
I mean, she's the best. And I want to bring us back to something that you said about, the Inheritors Overture in this piece, because so much of what's inherited is instinctual. It's just
Mm,
something that just sort of happens. It's something that you saw your parents do, you saw your siblings do, you saw whoever do, that it's kind of like it's a reflex,
yeah.
a reaction to this. And that's so funny that, sometimes I feel like a motherless child is weaved throughout this. I saw this really wonderful quote by the tennis player Naomi Osaka. Uh,
Oh yes, yes.
yeah, yeah, and she had said something like, "Every time that I get down on myself, I'm totally going to misquote her, but this is the spirit of the quote. Every time that I get down on myself, I remember what my ancestors went through, and I know that I can't lose." And
Wow. And
it's
she's really young to have
oh,
arrived at that kind of wisdom already.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I mean,
beautiful.
she's not older than 25, and I mean winning world championships and stuff like that. And I know
What have I done with my life? What have I done with my life?
everything, all good things. Everything that brought you to this point right here is good. And what's so funny about that is as I was kind of thinking about the social determinants of health and redlining and how we're talking about how neighborhoods are built, all of these things, and we're just trying to wrap up this segment of health and wealth and do our kind of checkup from the neck up, what it means for
Yeah.
inherited mental health, inherited education, how we take care of ourselves mentally in all aspects, as a form of inheritance.
Mhm.
A lot of that is really instinctual too. The things that you see other people doing around you growing up, or the way that you're going to value education. It becomes the way that you value your mental health.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with the neighborhoods in which your families live,
Mm.
and just kind of where your family has been positioned in the world and how you grew up, is how you value education, how you value mental health.
Yeah.
So there's this organization called Healthy People 2030. Well, actually, they're sort of a subsect of the CDC in some ways. They work kind of with the federal government, and they're really talking about how we get people healthier within this next decade. It was sort of born out of 2020 of how to get people healthier. And it
Mm.
spoke directly to education, which I thought was really funny because you don't really think of education and health as a correlation, but education is a
Yeah.
big determining factor of the social determinants of health. And they said that children from low income families, children with disabilities, and children who routinely experience forms of social discrimination, they're more likely to struggle with math and reading. And they're less likely to graduate from high school or go to college, meaning that they're less likely to get safe, high paying jobs and more likely to have health problems like heart disease and diabetes and depression.
Can you say that part again? What is the determinant? If they have X, they're more
Mhm.
likely to not do well at math and reading. What was the X? What was the variable?
Children from low income families, children with
Low income
disabilities,
families
and
and
children who
disabilities.
routinely experience forms of social discrimination. So, as
Mm.
we kind of went through this whole experience of what are the social determinants of health, and again, for those folks that are just tuning in, the social determinants of health are basically the foundation of why there's this huge disparity between how people of color have been able to navigate the pandemic. And those five determinants are economic stability, education access and quality, which is the big one we're talking about today, healthcare access and quality, the neighborhood and built environment, and social and community context.
Mhm.
So the big thing about this is that all of these sorts of things play into how you get your education. Redlining plays into what schools you go to. what community centers you have access to for after school programs, what outlets your parents have to, kind of put you into daycare when you're younger or not put you into daycare. All of that sort of plays into, how people are educated, especially how children are educated, and whether or not children experience forms of social discrimination. So it's pretty big. It's a pretty big deal when we talk about education and mental health and what's inherited, because as we know, as we've kind of discovered over the course of doing these 3 episodes, what's been inherited is a result of a lot of these really racist practices, that came out of the 20th century, and how people of color and Black people specifically were kind of pigeonholed into low-income communities and low-income neighborhoods because of some of these awful housing practices.
Right, because back just to piggyback on the word inheritance, right? Like I just want to highlight for everyone, an inheritance is not always, you can inherit bad things in addition to good things, right? I think there are some populations who inheriting is literally like, and I got a house, and I got some money, I got some resources from someone who just deceased, and that's great. But then, like you pointed out, there are also, there are learned behavior patterns that can also be inherited. You learn a lot from your parents. And the thing I wanted to highlight, you said earlier about the education, that I think is a very interesting part of the education conversation, and especially in regards to redlining and like how it defines your physical environment. It's not just what, if we're going to speak about it in terms of like students, right? It's not just what the individual student, the child, is enduring as they go through, right? It's also like, or the resources that they have. It's not just if their particular schools have computers, or if this, all of that is very, very important too. But it's also like, how involved in the child's education are the parents able to be? If both parents have to have full-time jobs, that they're not able to just be at home and just walk their children through their homework or help them answer that, so it's also that. So if you're in a situation where neither parent has an abundance of free time because of their situation, well, then that's important. And a lot of people from Black and brown homes, to be quite honest, it's not really a structure where necessarily it's one parent works and one parent's a stay-at-home situation. We've got lots of families with single parent environments. We've got lots of parents, lots of homes where both parents are working. And that's not even just unique to just Black and brown people. That's just kind of unique to Americans in general, this particular part of it. So it's also that aspect, right? So it's not like it goes away when all of a sudden you become an adult or whatever. So, and then even the adults with the children, they're also inheriting their patterns too. Like they learned what they can and cannot do. Like even, something, and might be a slightly off task, off the path for one moment, but there was one thing I was reminded of when I was growing up that I remember one of my friend's parents saying, and they were for context, they were from a middle, they weren't excessively rich, but they were doing fine. They were a suburban household, whatever. They did okay. But the mother was having a conversation about how she remembered when she was going to school that her mother was just never home for whatever given reason. I think she was also working, but her mother told her, you need to learn how to do this by yourself because no one's going to help you, because she had a learned behavior that she was not going to accept or receive help from community at large. Like she was basically sharing with her child that she needed to be a different level of independent because there wasn't a lot of help going to come to her. So she in turn felt like she needed to teach her child that from an early age, which I thought was so interesting. But it resulted in her not helping her child as much as she actually could have. She purposely did not help her child as much to prepare her to be able to do things on her own as soon as possible. And as much as that was coming from a good place, I think sometimes we, in an effort to correct certain behaviors we have, I think sometimes we put things on our children that are unnecessary and make things even more difficult, even when it comes to spending or investing and taking that kind of thing. Because I think sometimes marginalized communities, especially communities who have fallen victim to the effects of redlining,
Mhm.
really get nervous about spending large sums of money, even if it is investing in yourself,
Right.
right? Like we won't do things like spend a large sum of money to send someone to school or a special training ground because we just see the number figure
Mhm.
and we don't have the security. You know what I mean? This is making any sense where I don't know if I'm rambling. I'm rambling a
No,
bit.
no, no, not at all. And it's funny because it ties into this study that Healthy People 2030 did on high school completion programs.
Mm,
So they studied about 10 different communities and just did an economic impact review of what happens if we just infuse money into high school completion programs.
mhm.
And just maybe hopefully it might help health, it might help more students graduate. What happens if more students graduate from high school, more students have their education? And what they found essentially was that all of the interventions that they had made to increase these high school completion rates produce substantial, and this is a quote, produce substantial economic benefits to government and society, including averted healthcare costs. So they were able to infuse these 10 different communities with more funding for high school completion programs. And it directly affected the actual health of the people involved. And so it's funny that you
Interesting.
say this about, we want to be a little hands off and teach our kids to be really independent, but it's showing here that at least from an economic standpoint and just infusing funds or infusing time, energy, resources, however you want to categorize it, into students completing high school just directly leads to at least better health, if not a better quality of life overall.
Yeah.
For people. So that's really interesting that you say that.
And you know the other thing, and then this is more on topic. I'm getting better.
We're getting there.
This is but this mental health thing. I was thinking about something because we're in this moment, right? We're in this moment. We just made it through the lights at the end of the tunnel, but we just made it through this shutdown thing, the pandemic. We've got like police killing people. We've got all these kinds of things, all this trauma. And it was the stress level
Mm,
people just have on a normal basis. Just what you wake up, you have a breakfast, you walk out into public, and there's a certain amount of stress and anxiety
yeah,
that is just sewn into existing
yeah.
in America in 2021 right now, right? And I think we sometimes need to really give a different kind of attention to it and demystify these ideas of seeking psychiatric help
Mm,
or because I feel like especially in our community, it's really it's frowned upon. Like people don't talk about it. It's like something's wrong with you if
yeah.
you go to see a psychologist or you go to see a psychiatrist or you go to see a shrink. Shrink. Do we still use the word shrink? Is that a thing? Do people still say shrink?
I don't think so.
No. Is that?
Yeah.
I mean, am I being offensive? Is that like a word? Is that like even a thing? I never know these days. Words and terms change so frequently, but like it's a thing that people don't want to do. They feel like you have to get to some kind of weird point of calamity before you go talk to a person about your mental health,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
But we've all endured enough just by enduring the last year in America to qualify and in like medical terms, right? To qualify for actual medical care
Mhm.
psychologically. Like we've all experienced trauma. Like this year, the shutdown, being stuck in your house for a year
Right.
is traumatic.
Yeah.
Like we all should be seeking, if not professional help, at least proactively doing something, to counteract the effects of what we all just went through. And then when you tie in and the reason why I use this last year specifically because we can all relate to that, right? But then you tie in something like, well, since 1865, a certain population of people have been walking around with a certain looming pressure over them, a certain social dynamic
Mhm.
that they've been walking around with that is incredibly traumatic. I think at this point we talk about, and I'm sorry, we are going to get back to the music in a second, I know, but I just feel like just because we just passed the moment yesterday,
Yeah.
and everyone is, it's fresh on everyone's mind, this relationship between Black people and the police,
Yeah.
which is directly from Black people and another group of people who used to ride around on, horseback, gathering us. So, I mean, those two organizations are not separate. One led into the other, just for the putting it out there. I hope everyone always is aware of that. The police was born out of another organization. Let's just be clear about that for a second. But anyway, it's like we constantly have walked around, Black people have constantly walked around in an environment of danger. I don't think that people always understand that being a Black person in America is walking around always with a sense of danger. There is a danger in America that Black people have to be aware of, whether we tell our children, don't talk too loud, don't do this, cross your hands when you encounter an authority figure, all these things. And I think it's highlighted at moments when someone gets killed by the police.
Right.
Then we want to talk about it. But I always tell people, I'm like, you have to be aware of the fact that African Americans have been living with this relationship with the police forever, and have been living with the threat of physical violence forever. And if people feel like it's traumatic when they go off to war and there's PTSD, like Black people literally walk around with PTSD nonstop. And I just feel like sometimes we gloss over it because it's been here always, right? And so, it's, again, I know I'm slightly going off task, but I just think it's one of those things I sat with listening to Allison's piece. It reminded me of it because the other piece that I encountered with Allison that my ensemble commissioned from her was called The Pattern. And it was highlighting this recurring pattern and sequence of Black America will make gains, get somewhere, and then something happens,
Right.
whether it be a mass murder, a burning of a city, Tulsa, all these kind of, these things, and then we start over. And then it's this pattern. And I was like, it was tied into this piece too, because it is something we continually go through. Like, I think it's ridiculous. And I swear I'm going to like cede back to the regularly scheduled program. But I couldn't help but be reminded the thing I took away the most from the whole George Floyd trial, not necessarily him being murdered, not the physical act, the disgusting act of someone extinguishing his life slowly over 9 minutes, but the actual trial, the conversations. We were sitting here in America talking about, well, when is it okay to kill a Black person? Like, we were sitting around having a conversation like, let's talk about when it's okay to kill Black people. And we were sitting here being like, was it okay for him to kill a Black person in this instance? Like, what? And I was like, how it's rude. I was like, how rude. Like, I was really sitting there. I was like, this is rude. Like, we're all sitting here watching this case about whether or not this policeman is going to be convicted for killing someone. But the larger conversation was the value of Black life, right? We were sitting there talking about when is it okay to kill a Black person, and when should someone be held accountable? Not all the time. Like, the underlying message was, sometimes it's okay to kill Black people. Right? Like, inherent in the conversation of deciding whether or not he should be held accountable or the police should be held accountable, inherent in that conversation is saying that, well, then sometimes it is. And that's scary. Yeah. That's the part I latch on to, because we don't have this conversation about white people. And we don't have a conversation about, if a white person gets murdered, we don't sit around and talk about, well, should we hold someone accountable if someone killed? We don't have that conversation about that. And that's the part that I'm struggling with, Sarah. And I know I'm a little bit off task, but it's the part that sits with me the most about this conversation, is that we're supposed to sit here in have this like weird civil discourse about when it's okay for someone to kill me. That's a very weird conversation. And it's a conversation we're having across networks, across generations, about when it's okay to kill Black people. Sorry, but but that's stressful. That is stressful.
It is. And I think what's really interesting, about this is when we, at least for me, I'll speak personally, the way that I think that my parents went about this and like trying to evade you know, having to be worried all of the time
Yeah.
about, you know, if I was going to be in a situation that was going to be dangerous, if I was going to, you know, be able to say the right things, do the right thing so that I could escape out of these situations. The way that my parents said to my brother and I was, you need to get your education.
Yeah.
You have to, you know, kind of go to
Yeah.
school, you stay in school, you do really great, you know, get into after school programs, you just kind of keep your grades up, you go to college, all of these things
Right.
compounded on top of one another, that said, in essence, for you to evade danger, your education is the most important thing for you to be able to navigate these situations, not to be free of them entirely, but
Right.
to be able to navigate these situations. And that's what I think is so interesting about this education piece of the social determinants of health, because we're not only talking about health in terms of the pandemic, health in terms of disease, but we're talking about actual bodily harm, actual,
Right.
you know, kind of the harm that we need to navigate to, you know, kind of find a way around. You know, I want to touch on one more piece before we end, just because I think it's so fantastic.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
yes. I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
sidelined that completely. I had a moment, sir. I'm sorry. I just got caught up for a second. You know, I just.
Yeah, that's what the space is for. And you know,
Mm,
I think that this is something that has been felt for hundreds of years, unfortunately,
yeah.
is
Oh,
this,
since eight. Yeah.
right, this negotiation. And William Grant Still wrote this piece, The Little Red Schoolhouse. And I think initially it was for wind ensemble, and then it just kind of came about to be something a little bit different. It was sort of expanded. William Grant Still himself was educated at the Oberlin Conservatory and then at the New England Conservatory. You know, he was just an educated person. I
Snatching
mean,
degrees,
he's
just
got it
snatching
all. Just,
degrees.
yeah, doing the whole thing. And you know, his work, his music, he composed the Afro-American Symphony. He composed the Troubled Island, Ananga, one of my favorite pieces, like of all time. And I mean, all of it is just showcasing uh, Black life in America through these different lenses, knowing that there is this sort of underlying danger, these underlying just sort of a whole other aspect, a whole other view from being Black in America to every aspect of life as we think of it.
Yeah. You know what else he composed? He
Hmm.
also composed a piece that's the namesake for the TDU Orchestra. He also composed Plain Chant for America. Is that
Yes. Yeah.
correct?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I believe like the text from that
Hmm.
mentions the Dream Unfinished, which I believe is how Un came up with the name of the organization, correct?
Very much. Yeah, very much so. A little bit of TDU history. Look at you. I love that. I love that. So I'm going to share my screen because I want people to
Oh,
hear a
yes.
little bit of this. I want people to hear a little bit of the Little Red Schoolhouse. So this is El Camino College Symphony Orchestra performing a little bit of the Little Red Schoolhouse. to stop it there. And you know what's interesting
Hmm.
about this that I'm hearing, I think for the first time, especially after we just had this conversation, this sounds a little like battle music.
It's funny that you said that because I was thinking, have you ever seen Babes in Toyland?
Yeah.
I was thinking it sounds like the music with all the toy soldiers are about to do that. I mean, I was thinking the same thing. There's something that there's like a march quality or something
Yeah,
to it.
much so. Yeah, it sounds, and I keep thinking of the image of, the desegregation of schools in America. And you have this little black girl surrounded by, all these people just trying to go to school, just trying to go to
Just
school.
trying to go to school.
And it's images like those that kind of pop out to me when we talk about education in America, and sort of putting on this armor, arming yourself with knowledge, arming yourself with education so that you can navigate these different situations. And so it's interesting that on first listen I was like, I felt, I think, sort of differently about this piece, and now I'm like, oh, it just kind of clicked for me of where this really comes from, at least in
I,
my mind.
yeah, I was gonna say, listen, I love William Grant Still. He's got a lot of great things I think he's done that are amazing. I have to say, on first listening to this piece, first of all, I didn't recognize it as being him. It doesn't sound like his other work to me. Like if you had not told me this was he,
Hmm.
I would not have guessed
Yeah.
it was William Grant Still. And also, I- you know, I'm that's not my favorite one.
I know
Not my favorite one.
he's got a lot of work, and
He's got a
that,
lot of works.
yeah,
It's not my favorite one though.
that's the thing about prolific composers. You don't like every Mozart symphony,
You have
it's
to like everyone, and that's okay, right? You
that's
don't have to like
okay.
everyone, but it's not my favorite one. But I can hear this kind of like there's a rudimentary quality. Like I can hear like a lesson. You know what I mean? It seems very rudimentary. I can hear there's a practiced lesson, etude quality about it.
Mm.
I think that's the very thing I don't like about it. But I can't. I think that's the very thing I don't like about it. But I can hear that, and I can see how that makes sense for a piece entitled "Schoolhouse." What's the title of it again? Schoolhouse what?
Red Schoolhouse.
I think it's appropriately titled. I do get the imagery. I do get the sense of that. But consequently, it's not my favorite William Grant Still piece. I must say.
Yeah, it's funny. It is
Yeah.
a funny one. Well, there are 5 movements, so
Oh, something for everyone.
exactly. So if that movement's not your favorite, just go on to the next one. We got something for everybody here.
Well, that's my
Yeah.
homework. I will look that up. I'm going to
Okay.
listen to more of it.
I love that.
Yeah, but I think I'm so glad you're highlighting the education part
Mm.
of like it kind of like if there were a versus battle, right? It'd be like education versus mental health, and like how like I don't know, that was horrible. Retract all of that. That didn't make any sense. But I do like how like education is a tool to combat some of our triggers
Right.
for our stress and stuff. Because if you just listen to people tell you all the time,
Mhm.
you will stay crazy.
Exactly.
You will stay stressed. So it is a tool. It's not the only tool, and it's not a wholly effective tool, right? It doesn't work just by itself. Well, I'm not even going to go there because we'll get some complaints if I say this, but I think there are a lot of people who sometimes say, you know, I think sometimes we lean in a little too hard to let go and let God. A very popular phrase, right? Some people think prayer is the answer to everything. And yes, that's true, but you don't just sit around and do nothing, right? You still, while you're waiting for these prayers to be answered and blessings to fall upon you, you should be doing stuff, right? And I think that's the same thing with education. I think education is one of the things we can do whilst we're waiting for the world to right itself, right? And one of my favorite pastors is Reverend Butts from Abyssinian. I spent several years at that church, and he's the one that introduced me to the phrase "the checkup," from the neck up.
Mhm.
And in addition to the checkup from the neck up, he is a huge proponent of education. There's always an ongoing joke. There's a huge Morehouse presence at at Abyssinian, and he's quick to throw in a Morehouse reference, but just the education reference in general. They always highlight all the students who got accepted to colleges, what scholarships they won, what they're studying. It's an important aspect of how to succeed and overcome a lot of these hurdles that we have, but also just studying various topics is just good for your mind, right? And when we're in a world where we're being literally just all kinds of triggers and hurdles are being tossed at us on a daily basis. Sometimes you do need to escape into your talent. You do need to escape into your imagination. You do need to escape into your knowledge and take solace in finding solutions to some of these problems. Because I think it's about finding solutions, right? It's not just about coping. Education is the part that's helpful because it's, yes, we can practice certain kinds of things to cope with our predicament, but it's through education we learn how to solve some of these problems so that we don't have to cope with them anymore. We don't have to coexist with some of these acts of ignorance, right? We learn, we educate ourselves and gain the arms and armament to deal with some of these problems. So I'm really, really glad that you're highlighting the education aspect of this conversation and not just allowing me to go off into these tangents of being frustrated and upset at how we just have this common, comfortable discourse about the value of Black life. But yes, that is why you are here, to keep us on the right track, Sarah.
I know. And you know what, Damien, I think, we've had just this really wonderful, really rich conversation. And I want to make sure that we leave everyone with some things to be educated about. So I think, to wrap it up, we're going to leave some information about Alison Loggins Hall and her music. She's a wonderful composer. And then William Grant Still and his music and kind of everything that he had done in his life. And then we'll leave some information about Healthy People 2030 and just different sort of health education initiatives that you can check out as you're kind of going about your daily life, wondering how all of this comes together. But I'm really happy, Damien, that you and I have gone through this, just intensive conversation.
Yeah.
3 different episodes. Talk about mental health. This was difficult to prepare for. It's difficult to talk about. And we really went through a lot of the history of why the pandemic has been so horrific. And it's a hard reality to face, but hopefully we're able to provide some folks with tools to move forward and music to move forward with, to listen to as they're looking at these tools. So I want to close us out and thank everybody for being here for this 3-part series called Health and Wealth, as we just talked about the social determinants of health. Please feel free to reach out to us in the comments. Please hit us up over email and just let us know how you feel about all of this, about music, about the social determinants of health. And hopefully we can help you out and provide some more information. And we'll look forward to seeing and speaking with everybody again soon.
Yeah, I just have three little words to leave everybody with. Alison is dope. Look her up. Listen to her music, get into her as a person. She is a free speaker, not just composer. She will tell you her thoughts as well. She's a lovely artist to get to know, as is Miss Overton.
Oh, stop.
Yes, you are. I enjoy our conversations so immensely.
Oh, same here.
I enjoy you so much. So what's next? What can they expect to see next week?
Next week, we are going to talk a little bit about ranked choice voting. There's some big elections coming up in New York. All okay, so we got to get educated on that. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about voting. Let's talk about it all and how it ties into it. So I think that's for next week, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody there.
Yay!
All right. Thank you, everyone. Talk to you soon.